Thank you, everyone. We're very happy to be here. I always feel like I have such a little piece after this whole big thing. But the most important thing, and I think most of you know Brian through his research, his work in Massachusetts, and he's a devoted older brother of a woman with Down syndrome. And as you know, he's just a great all-around guy and a real advocate for your children. And so I'm very proud to be associated with him and doing sibling things for over the last 13 years or so.
And vice versa. So many good things come out of these conferences. So Sue and I actually met at a Down syndrome conference 13, 14 years ago. And we did a workshop together on brothers and sisters, and we've become good friends and researchers and colleagues. And I've benefited from all of her years of experience. And so this is one of our favorite topics to talk about. And it's actually the original topic that brought Sue and I together on a professional level. So it's fun to do.
So we hope you enjoy our show.
Yeah. The publishers of our book wanted to mention that at booth 239, we're going to be doing a book signing right after this workshop. So we're going to be talking about some of the things in the book, but if you brought your book with you or you would like us to sign it for your sons and daughters, we're going to be escaping right after this workshop and going to that booth. And we're also happy to be there to answer questions afterwards.
And pretty much everything we talk about today is in the book, and in terms of kind of the answers to questions that you might have or your children might have. It will help you kind of remember some of the things that we've talked about today. So I think you might enjoy reading it as well.
And many of you know this already, but for those of you who are new to one of these workshops, about 9 years ago, GQ magazine rated the worst dressed men in all of the United States, and they had a list. And all of you know I live in Boston. So men from Boston were rated as the worst dressed men in all of America, which I take issue with to begin with, right? But unfortunately, GQ magazine, as many of you know, decided to say Boston suffers from a kind of style Down syndrome where a little extra ends up ruining everything. That's what they wrote, and in addition to slamming Bostonians, they also drag people with Down syndrome that we love under the bus. This is my sister with Down syndrome who happened to be visiting that weekend in Boston when it came out. This is what we wear in Boston during the summer. This is how my wife dresses me up. These are Nantucket red pants for those of you who want your own pair yourself, and you know you do. So John Thompson, who is the writer for GQ magazine, again, this came out now 6 years ago. I wrote a little piece because I was angry, saying you can mock my pants, but don't mock my sister. So many of you responded. Everyone wrote to GQ magazine saying this is inappropriate. You're not going to take people with Down syndrome and treat them this way. GQ removed this, but they never issued a public apology. And so what I said to all of you is whenever we gather, I will continue to wear colorful pants until GQ magazine apologizes. So
you'll still wear the pants
I'm
after
still
they
wearing
apologize.
I decided to wear yellow for you today. But if this bothers you, I know John Thompson still loves to hear from all of you. So you can simply Google him, and his email is available, and you can write him still asking for that public apology. Yeah. Well, let's jump into our sibling topic. Before we begin, we want to do a little exercise with all of you moms and dads. How many of you moms and dads here grew up with your own brother and sister? Terrific. And how many of you were an only child? Great. You're not alone. Sue's an only child.
Yes, I'm an only child.
Great.
How I did end up in sibling world, I don't know, but I guess I always wanted that brother or sister. But we do like you to think about what it was like growing up in your own family, and think for a minute about some of the feelings that you experienced as a brother or sister. And we'd like you to shout them out, and we'd like to make a list here. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about feelings in your siblings?
Rivalry.
Of course. Others? Friendship. Preferential treatment. For you or for your sibling? For you. Were you I was going to say you're the baby.
Right? Things were unfair.
Yeah, but he was on the good end of it. He was the little boy after 3 older sisters, so. Competition, yeah? Protector. Were you an older sibling? Yeah, you're the younger one and you were protected, or you did protecting? Older brother, okay. Pride. Others? Caretaker. Others? Yes. Sorry? First love. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Bully. Were you the bully or were you bullied?
The younger sister.
Other feelings. Yeah. Inside jokes. So you kind of had the tight sort of special experience. Yeah. Yes. Role model. This is a really nice group of people.
Yeah. Annoyance, yeah.
Annoyance. That's better. Thank you.
And they can be all of the above, right? Annoying at one time and role model the next
Right.
day.
You can
and
be
bully
bullied
one
and
day.
protected within the, in a second. And other feelings, yeah. Fun. Mm-hmm. Other feelings? Sharing. There's a good and a bad side to that, right? Where nothing really is truly yours. Things get taken. Frustration, yeah. There's more. Teased. Fighting, yes, definitely. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the other. Confusion, okay. Loyalty. Yeah. Jealousy. Thank you. You can't have more than one child living in a family without that, even among the best of siblings, without having, a momentary jealousy at different points in time.
What about embarrassment, right? Isn't that the name of the game for
Yes.
siblings?
We said love. Anybody admit to feeling hatred even for a fraction of a millisecond when you were 10? Yes, okay. Good. A lot of head nods. Okay. Embarrassment, yeah. Oh, comparison, okay.
A very rich spectrum
list.
of emotions.
Yeah. When Brian and I do this, typically it takes about 4 or 5 before we get a positive statement of feeling. So that's why I say you're kind of a wonderful group because you have so many more positives on the list than negatives. But quite often it's pretty much equal, and sometimes there are many negatives before you start to see the positive come out a little bit. And we've had to prompt people to mention love in the past. So, but our point in showing you this, and there may be others that we've missed, but our point in showing you this is that the sibling experience is a rich experience anyway. And it's our longest lasting relationship, and you go through every single emotion when you're in a sibling relationship. So I think the thing to remember when you have a child with Down syndrome is that if you see some difficult feelings and moments and frustration, anger, embarrassment, etc., it's not just about Down syndrome. It's part of really, it's part of the sort of typical sibling experience. Yes, Down syndrome adds a different layer to it, but it is part of what we're supposed to see when we have children living in a family together. And when we do this with our individuals or our siblings, when we do our sibling programs, they often mention so many of the positives before they get into the negatives. So it's kind of neat to see.
Well, we're going to leave this front and center throughout this talk because invariably at one point you're going to think, this is only my family, they're driving each other crazy, and just remind yourself, look at the board, this is what a typical family looks like, all of these emotions. And so throughout our talk, we're trying to dissect what is related to Down syndrome, what's not related to Down syndrome. But again, sometimes we think we're just going to have a perfect family, we need to really make sure everyone's happy all the time, and that really robs us of the typical developing emotions that come along with being siblings.
Right.
But like Sue mentioned, sibling relationships, we know from the research, is the most intense. It's the longest lasting. We don't get to choose our siblings, unlike our significant others or our spouses or our partners that you get to choose. They're with us from the beginning, and they're with us through this life journey, whether we want it or not.
And certainly they shape who we are because we've learned how to share, we've learned how to resolve conflicts. We've learned how to kind of follow direction and see things in many different ways. So it is a very rich learning experience. And for those of us only children, we had to learn those things in different sorts of ways.
It teaches so many skills too. We know that how well we negotiate as adults is in part influenced by how well we negotiated with our siblings, the little testing laboratories, right? How well we fought and how well we conflict resolved as siblings. We figured it out with them. Test how we're going to do it in the workplace, how we're going to do it in college when we go there. So you have little laboratories at home, and allowing them to experience the robust nature of these emotions better prepares them when they reach adulthood, for sure.
Different things that change the experience in the sibling relationships are, first of all, family size. If you just have 2 children, then when there are intense emotions, positive and negative, they really only have one person to sort of pick on. Whereas if you have a large family, you can choose who to be angry at on a given day. So there's a little bit more of an intensity when there are just two children in the family.
Birth order makes a difference. Does a person with Down syndrome occur as the oldest, in the middle, or the youngest? And sometimes there are specific issues that come up. We'll be talking about some of those. Sometimes younger siblings who have an older brother or sister with Down syndrome might purposely slow down their own development as a way of waiting for their older sibling to do something first. For example, we might hear from a younger brother or sister that says, well, I don't want to start riding my bike yet because my older sister with Down syndrome hasn't accomplished that. So out of respect and love, I need to wait for that. So how do you deal with those particular situations when you have a younger one who's looking up to an older one, and chronologic age is really starting to get in the way? And we'll get into that as well.
Yeah, we'll get into talking about that later. But even with sort of that larger family size, we had spoken to a gentleman some years ago who had a sister with Down syndrome who was the youngest of, I think, 9 in the family, and he was number 8. And it was over a large age span. So he said that his older siblings never really got Down syndrome. They never really understood it in the same way he did because they were so much older, so much more removed, out of the house, in college before the little one was walking. So it was a very different experience, even living in the same family.
Yep. Age difference makes a difference. If you have a couple of sons and daughters you're thinking about, are they separated by 1 or 2 years? And that way they might have a lot of social overlap, go to the same school, have the same friends, do the same sports. Therefore, they can annoy each other more, right? The intensity of the emotions are higher.
Or embarrass each other more, right?
Or are they separated by 10 or 12 years? You have an infant with Down syndrome and also a college-age son or daughter. They might have the same emotions but different intensity. So that's something to think about as we go throughout our talk.
And then with gender association, same-sex siblings have more of shared experiences, whether it's sporting activity or toys, etc. So you may have a little bit more intensity or identification when you have same-sex siblings.
So as we go throughout, you can kind of dial up or dial down what Sue and I say based on how your family fits some of these moderating factors. Again, it's really a matter of dialing up the intensity on how strong these emotions are. Sue and I really wanted to go back to the research, and we looked at all the research and said, well, brothers and sisters like myself, you know, how well are we faring? Because out there were some rumors that, oh, we're suffering because we have a brother or sister with Down syndrome, or we're disadvantaged, etc. What does the research say about us? And when we looked at what was published already, the way the research is done is they have brothers and sisters, where one has a sibling with Down syndrome, and they compare them to brothers and sisters that don't have a sibling with Down syndrome. And they match them so they're the same age, they're the same sex, their parents make the same money. The only thing that distinguishes this study group is the sibling happens to have Down syndrome. They get a whole bunch of siblings here, a whole bunch of siblings there. And they do research by sending questionnaires to teachers, educators, parents, and just saying, we just want to ask you about your sons and daughters, not telling them whether or not Down syndrome was a part of the study. And the question is, does the public, do teachers, do parents respond differently when one of the siblings has a brother or sister with Down syndrome? All of this research primarily came out of Australia, and here's what we learned. Having a brother or sister with Down syndrome meant you were rated by your teachers and the public as having more kindness and less conflict in comparison to those siblings who didn't have a brother or sister with Down syndrome.
Which is kind of what we've seen in our experiences with brothers and sisters, for sure. Less prone to behavioral problems, and again, you know, by and large, just a difference with the looking at the entire group of individuals in the study, but we've also heard and seen that brothers and sisters are more apt to think about behaving, and because they had to be a role model for a sibling, or because parents had enough on their hands dealing with the individuals with Down syndrome, so that they were more conscious of sort of being good kids.
And we know that brothers and sisters who have siblings with Down syndrome are rated as more caregiving and going into careers of empathy. And Sue and I are always impressed whenever we talk to brothers and sisters about what do you want to be when you grow up, and somehow having a sibling influences them. And I know you had a conversation with some teenagers.
Yeah, I had a panel at the agency where I live. I had a panel of siblings of individuals with Down syndrome, and they were all college students at the time. And not surprisingly, one of the girls was going into special ed. Another one of the girls was going to be an occupational therapist. The other girl was going to be a speech therapist. And the guy kind of looked and said, well, I'm not going to do any of those things. I want to be on Wall Street. I want to make lots of money going into the financial field. But then sort of the light bulb went off in his head later in our conversation, because he realized he had started a group on campus to support the homeless and the needy in the community where his college was based. And he realized that even though he wasn't going to throw his entire career into Down syndrome, that situation, that empathy, that sensitivity, that really came through in somewhat of a different way.
Whenever Sue and I are doing workshops with brothers and sisters, we always tell them you should grow up and be whoever you want to be, because how great will this world be when all the future leaders have a sibling with Down syndrome? And somehow, some way, you remember, and Down syndrome kind of gets into your role. So I have two sisters. Kristen, who's 2 years younger than I, she has Down syndrome. And then 4 years younger than me is Allison. She doesn't have Down syndrome, and Allison's a pharmacist. And she is in Indianapolis, and don't tell anyone I told you this, but Allison says whenever there is a baby in the NICU that happens to have Down syndrome, they get their meds first, she goes by first, she's visiting with the family, right? And no one asked her to do it, but it's just a part of who she is, right? I have my sister to thank for going into medicine. I can't imagine a more fulfilling life than being able to work with patients with Down syndrome on a daily basis, and I have Kristen to thank for that. Right. And then I remember when I was in Tennessee, this is now maybe 8 or 9 years ago, talking to adult siblings, and we all went around, why did you become who you became when you grew up? We're going around, and one adult sister looked me in the eye and she said, I became a hairdresser specifically because of my sister with Down syndrome. Didn't get the connection, so I said, what about your sister inspired you to become a hairdresser? And she said, every day she makes people feel beautiful, and this is how I could do the same myself. No matter what you go into, when you have a sibling with Down syndrome, it forms you. And I would just say as parents, support them whatever they want to go into, because we need better leaders of tomorrow who have siblings with Down syndrome.
So kind of not like sometimes doctors would lead you to believe, or other professionals, that it's going to ruin your family, it's going to affect your family negatively. There are so many positive things that come out of living in a situation where you have a sibling with a disability.
Sue and I decided that research was older and we needed updated research. So thank you to all of you who responded to our questionnaires. So we published a paper on what does it mean to have a brother or sister with Down syndrome, and we sent over 5,000 surveys to all of you across the country. They came to
California
Sue's mailbox.
Right, they did. They came to my mailbox, and my husband helped me open them all and catalog them, etc. And so we were very pleased to get the number of responses that we did. And as you can see, we had over 800 responses from brothers and sisters as well, which, anytime you send out a survey, it's usually, 10% you get back?
Yeah, that's about it.
So we doubled that, which we were pretty impressed with. And the majority of those were full biological siblings. There was diversity among Hispanic and religion as well.
So sprinkled throughout our talk, we want to share with you what brothers and sisters have to say. So now we could correct the misperceptions with data, with evidence. So 96% of older siblings like their brother or sister with Down syndrome. You know that already, but now we could tell the world that statistically it's true. 87% of younger siblings are proud of their brother or sister with Down syndrome. I'm oftentimes in a position of doing prenatal counseling sessions where I'm talking to expectant parents, and they ask me, what is it going to be like for my other sons and daughters? So thank you for responding, because now I have data to be able to share with those couples who are going through that pregnancy process.
29% in siblings 9 to 11 feel sorry for their sibling. 4% of siblings older than age 12, which they could trade their sibling with Down syndrome. I think there are a lot of you in this room that would have gladly put your brother or sister up for auction at some point in your growing up experience. So I don't think that's such a bad thing, right?
So Sue and I are very lucky. We get to do workshops with brothers and sisters around the country, and we really enjoy doing it. And as part of the exercise, we ask, well, first of all, we kick out all the moms and dads, right? Because they're not going to open up with you in the room. And one of the exercises we do is we hand out index cards, and you can write any question you always wanted to ask about Down syndrome, something that annoys you, something you just want to workshop, something you want to celebrate. Don't put your name on the index card, but throughout the workshop, we're going to pull those cards so we don't know who asked the question, and we'll be able to kind of solve those together. What we're going to present with you is the most common questions that we get, and more importantly than I think the content of the questions is what we've learned along the way on how best to approach and start to answer some of these questions.
My favorite person coming into the workshops, though, is the one who says, well, I don't really need to be here, and I don't know anything. I don't have any questions about Down syndrome. And then over the course of the day, you realize they've taken in so much. So even if they feel they know it all, it's always a good learning experience. Just as being here is for all of you, even if you know a lot of the information in the workshops, there's always something new that you gather and you glean from things.
We've categorized these by the types of questions. We get a lot of medical questions. And what we've learned is that...
And it's great to have a doctor in there to answer those questions, but...
But again, not always necessary, because some of the answers that they're looking for, they don't really care about those answers. But when their friends come over, they need to have the quick Down syndrome elevator speech. And we all go through it. You bring friends over, and invariably they'll say, what's up with your sister? And you need to just have that quick Down syndrome speech. And somehow when you're a brother or sister, you're believed to be born with this information, like you're already supposed to know everything about Down syndrome. All of you parents get to go to workshops. You don't know it either, you're learning it, right? But as siblings, we don't get to go to these workshops. And so sometimes we're asking you questions not because we need the info, but we need to translate it. And how do they get that extra chromosome? You didn't think about chromosomes until you were in high school, right? But we have people in first and second grade asking us about what does a chromosome mean. And all of you are very creative in describing this. There's great books out there to explain it now, many through Woodbine House. But again, giving the basics of what causes Down syndrome is going to be helpful in their elevator speeches.
Can Down syndrome be deadly? A question that may have come from the fact that they are very worried about their own sibling, or they know of other medical emergencies and situations that other people have experienced with Down syndrome. So those kinds of questions, you want to kind of find out more. Why are you saying that? Why are you asking that? So and as a parent, that would be the way to approach that.
Should we tell the cake story?
Explaining the chromosome, for sure.
Moms and dads are so creative. Chromosomes don't have to be that boring, even though I'm a geneticist, a boring genetics drawing of chromosomes, right? When they're younger, one mother came up and said she loves to bake. All right, and she had 3 girls. 1 girl had Down syndrome, and it was Dad's birthday. And they were going to make the most delicious cake ever, chocolate frosting, the way Dad likes it, right? So they come and they get to the recipe, and it calls for 2 eggs. And Mom says, let's just throw in an X-ray. So she threw in 3, not 2. You get where she's going, right? And they made the cake. They put the icing on it. Dad came home. It was a delicious cake. They loved it. And then they all went to bed. What I love is you all know how to time the lessons, right? So the next day, she pulled her 2 daughters aside who didn't have Down syndrome, and she said, remember we made that cake, right? Yeah. We added 3 eggs rather than 2. Was the cake delicious? Of course it was delicious. Maybe it was a little fluffier. Well, your sister has an extra something in her. She has a 3rd chromosome rather than 2. And it means she's just as important as all of us. She's still an Anderson. We still love her. Something different, but she has a different ingredient in her. And she said, well, I didn't know if it stuck with my daughters. And no, but this is why we know that they listen to everything you have to say, even when they won't admit to it. So a couple weeks later, her daughter, who didn't have Down syndrome, had a friend over, and they were playing downstairs. And the mother was eavesdropping, as all of you do when your kids bring friends over. You know you do. And she was listening, and then that question came, hey, what does your sister have? And then her daughter said, well, imagine you're making a cake, right? So they really do incorporate. And as we get older, we start to write college essays about Down syndrome. We start to make careers about Down syndrome. So this question of the extra chromosome really does mature with us as we get older.
And when children are little, it's so hard to explain and understand the chromosome anyway. So it's a great way to do it in a fashion that's sort of tangible and meaningful. We had another parent who, mom was an architect, so she talked about designing a building that had an extra wall, so it wasn't just like a square or rectangle, but adding a different angle onto the house. And that, again, it's still a house. It has some different qualities to it. It looks a little bit different, but it's still a house and keeps you warm in the winter and cool in the summer. So there are other kinds of ways you can do things like that to help explain it. Why are some people with Down syndrome short? Again, that's sort of doing a little analysis over the population of individuals with Down syndrome. So again, it all goes back to that extra chromosome.
Are all kids with Down syndrome strong? I remember the first time I answered this, I gave such a brilliant response. I should have been paid on the spot. I talked about muscle hypotonia. We go through physical therapy, and here's how the muscle strands come together. And the 8-year-old who asked me this was increasingly becoming more confused. And so I said, well, what don't you understand about this brilliant answer? He said, so is that why mom couldn't move her in the grocery store? I said, what? She said, when we were going by the ice cream, she sat down and wouldn't budge, and mom couldn't move her, right? So the question wasn't, are all kids with Down syndrome strong? The question was, are all kids with Down syndrome stubborn, right? And I answered the exact wrong question, wasted her time, and confused her even more. And this has been a humbling experience, because when brothers and sisters ask us questions, they never quite get it right, either on purpose or not. When they first ask us, they're testing us. So Sue and I have always adopted the approach, when you have a question where something is not clear, always ask it back. What an interesting question. Tell me, what do you mean by strong? Oh, well, in the grocery store, she sat down. I got more clarity, so I can make sure that my answer is targeted to what you wanted.
Right.
And you're going to see this play out in several questions that come. And how can you tell someone has Down syndrome? Again, this is the elevator speech that they're looking to be able to give to their friends when they come over.
I do love that analogy because, again, on the playground, other places, just having a really simple explanation about Down syndrome really goes a very long way. And even little ones can sort of do a good job in explaining the basics of Down syndrome.
So we want to hear from you. Let's say that you're in the minivan and you're driving somewhere, and your son or daughter finally opens up and says, Mom or Dad, why does his face look kind of odd? How would you respond? What are some? We're all friends here.
Yeah.
Right. So what is odd, right? So such a wonderful response. Some of you, like me, I would have perhaps back then said, odd? What do you mean by odd? She's beautiful. We love people with Down syndrome. We got photos up of people with Down syndrome. What do you mean by odd, right? That natural inclination to shout that, all of a sudden they interpret it as a big X. They asked the wrong question, it took them courage to bring it to you, and somehow they made a mistake. Versus if we asked them about odd, they might respond, they called her odd on the playground. Oh, now we could have this rich opportunity to talk about teasing and bullying, and they were actually just using words that they had heard, right? So there usually is a gift there, but sometimes you gotta open the box, get the peanuts out of the way, and find the gift. Right? So kind of really pausing to ask questions.
Or it may have been something like the child has her mouth open and her tongue's out a lot. Maybe they're concerned or confused about why that's happening. So giving an explanation for that reason might be the answer as well. But always kind of, especially with that sort of different question, it does help to know exactly where they're going with it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The facial features or something. Yeah. Right. Right. And you can, you can do it just very matter-of-factly and say sometimes people with Down syndrome have a slight difference with their eye slant and, that sort of thing. And just sort of give, again, those facts because maybe they're thinking about it and, again, they want to be able to share that with other people and explain that. And when they do, if they're fortunate enough to be in a situation where they do know other individuals with Down syndrome, either through a support network that you have at home or by coming to a conference, et cetera, I think it helps them understand those differences. Yeah.
So the take-home point, if you remember nothing through this, is before you answer a question, ask yourself if you need more information. And it's always okay to dig and dig to really get at what they're at. We've heard from brothers and sisters, sometimes they've been thinking about a question for 2 or 3 weeks before they have the courage or they feel like it's well formed in order to place it in front of you as mothers and fathers, right?
And
so
of course,
on to the questions.
it kind of doesn't even just get associated with Down syndrome. As a parent, you know, your kids come to you with all kinds of things, and it's always good to kind of probe a little bit before you do give an answer with any topic. So
we're going to get into educational questions. So you have all chosen the perfect school placement for your son or daughter with Down syndrome, but oftentimes it's your siblings that have to justify it or explain it to their peers, particularly if they're in the same school. So sometimes we hear from parents, oh, I don't want to worry my other kids about the IEP and things of that sort, but if they need to explain it, they need to get some of your background on why you chose that particular educational placement.
Yeah. Why did he do preschool twice? Same principle applies. Sometimes repeating is really helpful to help the child kind of get those basic skills in place, but it may look like failure to your brother, your siblings, or to other people in the community. So explaining why that's the appropriate decision will help them, again, transfer that information to others.
What's the best way to educate people with Down syndrome? No one right way. There's lots of different ways, and you have your own thoughts on educational theory, and again, helping that. Why is it called Down syndrome? We all know it's named after Dr. John Langdon Down, but I remember when Trig Palin was in the news, previous election, so I got called by the LA Times, and they were asking me, oh, Dr. Skotko, I understand that people with Down syndrome have a higher rate of depression. I'm like, well, I get, what does this have to do with the story? People with Down syndrome are sometimes sad. Yeah, what does this have to do with the story? Is it okay for Trig Palin to be up at night? Like, isn't he going to be more? And then I said, you know, Down syndrome is named after Dr. John Langdon Down. Oh, really? They assumed Down was associated. And this is a journalist for the LA Times. Right. So if that person can't do a quick Google search, then the person sitting next to you in first, second, or third grade is not going to know where that word comes from. Right. So again, empowering people to understand that it could have been Levine syndrome, it could have been Skotko syndrome. That's where the word Down comes from. Right?
This kind of stuff, though, is great because I feel like our kids, when they have that knowledge and that power, it just gives them sort of a better sense of their own self-esteem, that they can explain all these things to other people. You know, I remember years ago a mom who had just had a baby with Down syndrome, and the 2-year-old it was announcing in the grocery store that they had a baby with Down syndrome, which did not make mom really comfortable at the beginning. But again, sort of having that word, you know, my brother or sister has Down syndrome, it's just sort of an empowering thing. But to know where the name came from and what is connected with it is really helpful to broaden the story. Can people with Down syndrome graduate from college? So oftentimes we find that as the siblings are evolving in their own life and moving forward with milestones, etc., that brothers and sisters begin to think about, well, what about my sibling with Down syndrome? Will they be able to go to college like I want to do and my friends want to do, or are they not going to be able, and what will happen then? So that kind of question may be just, again, concern for the future, and brothers and sisters do worry about the future. So they just may need more information from you on your thoughts long term.
We probably need to talk about the G word. Brothers and sisters feel the G word often, and that's guilt. Whenever we have...
Oh, we don't have that on the list. We need to add that.
Whenever we have this major life event, so we go away to college, we then say, well, what about my brother or sister with Down syndrome? Will they be able to experience a really exciting moment followed by guilt? Whenever some of us might get married or be in a relationship, we say, well, what about my brother or sister with Down syndrome? Marvelous, but at the same time we feel guilty, right? We move out of the house, guilty, right? And so it's so helpful to be able to have these experiences validated and these emotions validated by parents for us to know that it's okay to feel excited and to feel like you're accomplishing things, and at the same time by validating, it'll make that guilt kind of go away a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's really refocusing on our brothers and sisters with Down syndrome. Are they happy? Are they leading meaningful lives? Are they leading productive lives? Because happiness, as we all know, is not judged by what college you go to or not go to, what car you drive or not drive, what positions you have or you don't have. Some of us know that beforehand. Some of us are fortunate to be able to learn that by growing up with a brother or sister with Down syndrome. So it creates for rich conversations.
Yes, and a lot of times, too, siblings have trouble when it comes to driving because, of course, their brother or sister with Down syndrome wants to drive as well. So working through how they're going to deal with that has been helpful in some of the conversations we've had in sibling groups. And, you know, often the sibling will end up saying, you know what, I'm just going to be the designated chauffeur. So anytime my brother or sister wants to go somewhere, I'll be the one to drive him, and I'll let him know he can always ride shotgun, and it's just going to be good. So sometimes they work it through by coming up with a good solution for themselves. Where will my brother with Down syndrome live when he gets older? So if you got a question like this, and your child is 4 or 5 or 6, and you really don't know exactly where the future's going to go, how might you think about answering a question like that? Anybody want to share?
Or how have you answered it already? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
What I love about your response is you say there are lots of options. You're demonstrating that there's no one set way for your particular family, and the fact that you're open to that conversation. Those answers might change as people get older.
Right. And their wish to be part of that might change as well. I remember, again, years ago, I had a woman with Down syndrome and her older sister, 2 years older, who up until she was about 10, 12, 13, oh, my sister's going to live with me, we're going to travel Europe together, I'm going to get a mother-daughter house. Well, as she got to be a teenager and her life sort of began to evolve in other directions, she knew she would always be involved, but that same sort of vision and idea did not stay the same. And, again, they have a wonderful relationship as two individuals in their 30s, but they, it evolved into something different. But it's great that they want to be part of it, and that's the main thing, is you want to help encourage them to want to stay connected as they get to be adults.
I always get nervous when a parent comes up to me and says, oh, I am so lucky. My 8-year-old just turned to me and said, don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of her for the rest of my life, which is marvelous. There is great love there. But sometimes that 8-year-old grows up and circumstances change. For example, my sister Kristen, as you know, lives in Ohio. My wife and I live in a shoebox in Boston, right? If something, God forbid, were to happen to my mother and father, Kristen, one, we would love to have her, but there's no place for her right now in our current living situation in Boston. But more importantly, that's not where her life is. Her life is in Ohio. That's where her job is. That's where her friends is. That's where her life is. So we need, as a family, to say, even if I were that sibling, to say, don't worry about it. That's not the right solution at this point for my family at this point in time. So it really has to be a dynamic conversation that's revisited. As a family, we revisit it once a year just to make sure what are the circumstances. It starts off as a very uncomfortable conversation, but once you get used to it on a regular basis, I think for siblings, just communicating and even knowing when there's not a firm plan, just knowing that it's out there and you've discussed it. And I say it's helpful to start discussing this when people start moving out of the house. So when your other siblings or your other brothers and sisters move out of the house, that's when you could get it. I'm going to just ask, we have so much material, we'll hold questions for the end, but we'll be around for the questions afterwards.
Just to add to your story a little bit, we had that experience at my agency. The woman with Down syndrome who's 37, her mother died suddenly, and and the sibling was living in Utah. So the one sibling, and it was really one of those moments where all the details hadn't been nailed down. But we were able to sort of all come together as a community involving the care providers, et cetera, to pull together a very good solution for this young woman. Her sister is still in Utah, and the woman with Down syndrome said very emphatically, I am not going to Utah. So because her boyfriend and all her friends are here or in New Jersey. So it was a huge, to think about uprooting her and moving her where there are no supports in place for her and she didn't know anybody would have been terrible. So it all worked out, and the sibling in Utah is doing a beautiful job of coordinating everything from there. So, thanks to texting and internet today, it really goes a long way to making a successful experience.
Be happy to know from our research the more overwhelming majority of siblings do plan on being involved with their sibling as they get older. It's not everyone, so it's important to have that open and honest conversation to understand where they are for your own planning purposes. One thing I really loved about watching Born This Way, many things, is to see the role that siblings have played in that show and how much love they have and how they're involved. They're critical players in this life journey, as so many of them are. But I'm going to tell you a story, but don't tell my wife I told you this, all right? So oftentimes when we're dating or when we decide that this is going to be the person we're going to be in a long-term committed relationship, we kind of give them a Down syndrome test, right? We say, will they actually kind of be around ourselves? So my wife and I, this was now 12 years ago, our first in-person date, I kid you not, was here at this conference, right? So I was speaking, it was in Washington, D.C. I know, it's a great first step, right? So I was here speaking, she was working in D.C., we were in D.C., and I said, well, when I'm done, why don't you come to the dance? And you know what the dances are like, right? So she and I actually went to college together, we had taken some dance lessons together, so I thought, oh, this would be fun, we could go back to those days, right? So we get to the dance floor, and I'm there and she's there, and you know, everyone is out there with Down syndrome already shaking it. So we do a dance, and the first dance together, it's like our first in-person date, I'm so excited, so nervous, etc. And then this stocky man with Down syndrome comes up, taps me on the shoulder, and says, hey, can I have her for a dance? Oh, you know, no, she's with me, but thank you so much, and whatever. And I didn't know how comfortable she was with this whole party that we have once a year. So he just stood there, as you know it isn't. So I went to college down south where we did a lot of swing, right? So I swung her out, and then like a vulture, he came in and he grabbed her and started dancing. So then I stood, and she was smiling, and she went with it. And honest to goodness, in the back of my mind, I said on that first day, this might work. Like, she's like doing it, right? So the song is over, and now that kind of smile is turning into like, what am I supposed to do next look, right? So I come up and I tap him on the shoulder, oh, you're a good dancer, etc. Can I have my date back? And I'll never forget, he turned to me, clear as day, he said, listen, buddy, this ain't no playground. What are you talking? I have never brought her back to another Down syndrome dance. She's actually here this weekend, and she's not allowed to come to the conference. So I've kept her to myself ever since then. So those dances are vicious, as you know sometimes. But these are the tests that we do all along the way.
More social questions here. Can people with Down syndrome have normal jobs? So a question might be there too. Well, what do you mean by normal jobs? Because there are so many of us that have unusual jobs, and there are many ways, as Brian indicated earlier, where you can have a fulfilling life and not necessarily do the typical kinds of things. So it's a great opportunity, a question like that, to really open up a discussion of what possibilities there might be for the future for individuals with Down syndrome. So.
How come they talk different than us? Oftentimes, we as siblings serve as the interpreter. You all speak Down syndrome fluently, so you could understand, but as you know, when we're out there with our friends in the community, and someone, Kristen, tells them something, my sister, and they don't understand, I don't want to say what Kristen said and make her feel bad, but at the same time, I'll be an interpreter. So she might say something, and I'll say, well, who did you vote for on American Idol? Oh, Kristen must have asked me a question about American Idol, right? So we always find ourselves as siblings in these situations where we're trying to help a friend understand, and at the same time not necessarily embarrassing our brothers and sisters. And so speech and expressive language is really important for many siblings. I think
just to sort of segue off of that, all of you are advocates for your child with Down syndrome as you are for your other children, and you take on that role because that is part of being a parent. Brothers and sisters become advocates somewhat inadvertently and not necessarily by choice, but on the playground, being the one that is interpreting, even at age 4, and I've had many little ones sort of talk about that, how they help everybody else understand what their brother or sister wants. So they're put in the position where they do have to sort of stand up and support from a very young age. And many of them, again, go on to be advocates in their own right, but it's not always a comfortable position for them. So it's worth kind of noting that as well. How does Down syndrome affect the way my brother's life is? Again, what's exactly the behind that question? Is that a future-oriented question or just something explaining why things have to happen differently in the present? Sometimes brothers and sisters wonder why the sibling with Down syndrome may need extra help with homework, or mom or dad is spending so much time assisting them with different kinds of things.
Will she be ugly? Oh, right? Where did that question come from, right? And there's a part of you that, if you're admitted, is a punch in the stomach, right? But again, pausing and realize every question is a gift, right? And asking a question, what do you mean by ugly? We might hear, they called her ugly on the playground, someone else called her ugly, or perhaps I'm seeing older people with Down syndrome and they look different from the babies with Down syndrome. Oftentimes the vocabulary that's used, particularly by younger brothers and sisters, does not have the same connotation that we attach to it as adults. So really, we have the opportunity in our responses to say, you know, all people with Down syndrome are different, but they're the same in so many ways. She looks like our family. Yes, her eyes might be different, her ears might be different, but we love her the way she is. This is how we define beauty. So you could really give some vocabulary that they could use to own it, but also to share in case that comes up in social circumstances.
And then sort of just building off of that, we have so many parents who often talk about being reluctant to explain Down syndrome to siblings. They want to get the child to get to love the baby first before they go into that. But children don't know what Down syndrome is. We all as adults know what that is. So when you hear that from a physician or in another setting, you kind of resonate with what that is. Children don't typically know that, so they don't have any negative connotation associated with it. And the connotation you want to have associated with it is the connotation that you set up and describe for them, so that they understand Down syndrome as a positive thing that may lead to some different experiences, but it's not necessarily negative.
Will they get into fights? Something good's going on there, so we got to dig a little bit deeper.
We
right?
can only guess what the story is behind that.
We get this one sometimes. My brother or sister knows that he has Down syndrome, that he is different. Does yours? Another way is, should we tell them, right? Different families have different approaches. Let's hear from a couple of you. How have you approached this within your family? Yes, please.
It honestly hasn't come up. My son went down to 7. He doesn't see any difference between other kids. And it hasn't been an issue. And when it does come up, obviously that's where we'll have to cross. But right now, he just sees people.
Right.
That's all he sees.
Okay. So the response is that, I'll repeat it for those of you in the back, the response is it hasn't come up, and so this is a family where it's not, Down syndrome is not the centerpiece of the dining room table and constantly talked about, but when it comes up, it will be addressed. Yeah.
My son is also 7, and he's definitely self-conscious at school, but his siblings are both older than they don't care. So basically, they are very supporting of him, and they're very aware that he has Down syndrome, he has therapy, whatever, but still like to play.
Do you use the term Down syndrome? Probably most of you do use the term around the house, sort of, you know.
Very upfront.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah,
When they ask about embarrassment, where babies come from, like, they got the real
that's good. Yeah.
We
So
have-
it's, you know, sometimes when you have that as part of the conversation in an ongoing way, the children, again, kind of begin to learn about it. But just one story to share with you, when we did a sibling group with young children, I think we were in Maryland, and I had the younger kids and Brian had the older kids in separate workshops, and there was a little boy in my group that was getting more and more agitated and uncomfortable, and what he ended up saying to me was, I'm not really sure who has Down syndrome, maybe it's me. And I think his parents did such a good job of smoothing over Down syndrome that he really had a hard time sort of identifying, again, what Down syndrome was. And it was a little bit terrifying to him not to really know. So typically we don't talk to parents after our workshops about in an individual way and break any confidences, but this was a time where I decided that the mom needed to know and that there needed to be a little bit more of a directed conversation to explain it. So again, I think we sometimes pump everything up. It's so positive, it's so wonderful, and it is, but there are some differences, and really describing that and explaining that was critically important in that little boy's life.
What we know doesn't work is these big table conversations where now we're going to sit down, we're all going to learn about Down syndrome. That becomes awkward for everyone involved.
Right.
It's just these little pieces throughout. And I think the biggest start we know is just using the word Down syndrome. I would rather have you as a family define the word, that it's a neutral and a positive word rather than whispering the word. So we're then relying on society to define the word, which is oftentimes not defined the way that we want it defined. As they get younger, there's different books that are available through Woodbine House where characters have Down syndrome. You can incorporate in board books. And then certainly as they get older and more mature, there are more sophisticated books that talk about Down syndrome and some of the nuances of that. I see so many hands. We got so much info.
We got to
want
keep
hear
going, I
from
guess,
you.
right?
But we'll be around afterwards. Yep.
How are we doing on time?
Good. We'll be on time.
Okay.
Stick to it.
All right.
So in terms of family life, 14% of younger siblings want you as parents to know that their sibling with Down syndrome is getting away with things, so make them do more chores. pulling the Down syndrome card is oftentimes well played by our friends with extra
Absolutely,
chromosomes.
especially if they say, I can't do that, I have Down syndrome. And we've heard that happen. So you want to make sure that, sometimes I think when brothers and sisters do tell parents things, it's good to listen. I had a family, siblings from a family with 4 children in it, and the oldest had Down syndrome. And the parents tried to be extremely fair, and they set aside, they took turns for who was going to clear the table and load the dishwasher every night. Well, on the night that it was the girl with Down syndrome's turn to do that, she would eat extra slowly. So she was eating her peas 1 pea at a time. So what mom would do was say, Johnny, you do it, your sister's still eating. Well, Johnny was pretty upset because he knew that this was very contrived and that his sister was pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. So I encouraged him in that group to speak up and have a conversation with mom. And hopefully he did, and things got smoothed out there. So sometimes it's good to listen. They may have some good suggestions for you.
88% of your sons and daughters do feel comfortable asking you questions, so you should be very happy. Let's take a quick pause. Some of you are probably saying, but I've never been asked any of these questions, and that's A-okay. The fact that you're here, you're already the all-stars, right? So if you haven't been asked any of these questions, it could be that they have all the answers, or they have been kind of asking them and it's not been in an obvious way. Some places to sometimes test that is if you're going to a friend's house, you might say, let's say the friend's named Elizabeth. Does Elizabeth ever ask you any questions about Down syndrome? So you could use a friend as a proxy for sometimes, oh yeah, Elizabeth asked me what Down syndrome is, so this is what I told her, no big deal. And you can kind of get a tap of how they're communicating. Other times it's used things in current events. So if someone used the R word and it was covered in the newspaper, you could talk about how that really makes Dad angry when people use the R word. And then you pause. And maybe, yeah, I heard that at school, right? And so you use a current event really to kind of form it. And now we have so many people with Down syndrome who are on TV, you could even use those as little micro lessons to say, have we experienced this as a family? Is there things to kind of talk
Brian,
about?
do you still have that thing that triggers anytime there's a news story related to Down syndrome, you get an alert about it?
Yeah.
So you can,
you could set up in Google so that you get these alerts if Down syndrome come up, and you could even see that as teaching opportunities.
Yes, teaching opportunities, exactly. As a parent, I always found bedtime and driving alone with one of my kids in the car was the best time to ask questions. So, oh yes, and then this was... So even
Sue, you found this magazine article and it resonated.
I love this. And it's so funny. There's a Judy Blume book that's called The Pain and the Great One. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it is a story of a younger brother talking about the same experiences with his sister, and then the second half of the book is the sister telling the same experiences with the brother. And they both take the same piece of information and frame it negatively toward the other. So, it's kind of like, the cat, my sister always gets to feed the cat. Why don't I ever get a chance? And the sister's saying, the cat always sleeps on my brother's bed. Why doesn't this cat ever sleep on my bed? So there's always that sense of, who's liked best and who's most important in the family. But, I love the expressions there.
We know that there are sociologists who just study the science of favoritism, and there's actually a whole literature on that. And when they interview mothers, primarily for this research, mothers will never admit to their children, but on paper and research, mothers will say, I secretly have a favorite. Okay, I'm not asking you to admit it, but oftentimes in families where someone has Down syndrome, the person with Down syndrome is perceived to be as the favorite, whether correct or not, perhaps because they get the most time and attention, they have the most celebrityhood around them kind of growing up. But many of you could probably relate. Were you this person growing up, this person, or were you the ones who always got the biggest slice of the pie? But here's the benefit. When this person happens to have Down syndrome, these faces change, and this is why. Favoritism, we know from research, is easier to take when there's a defensible reason for it. So siblings realize, my brother or sister has Down syndrome, there's a defensible reason, they need more time, my parents need to give them more attention, and so the lifelong angst and jealousy that they feel is really mitigated. And even the most tolerant siblings at some point will begin to feel that, healthy or not, they deserve their fair share. So what do you do about this? You never say who's the favorite, but you say, I need to spend more time with your sister today because of the following. You're giving them the reason for it. It's not just selective. or I'm going to do this because I need to do this for her, well, development, etc.
We always encourage brothers and sisters, too, to ask or to be sort of proactive, and if they need time alone with mom or dad, really to speak up and try to arrange that, because most of you would be happy to do a little something to spend one-on-one time with any of your children. So, you know, it's a nice thing to do also, to encourage siblings to let you know, and hey, what about me, and to let you know.
Thomas, we'll take your questions up here.
Okay.
So now we want to get into some of the negative feelings, and as we start to get into more difficult situations, we want you to recall all of the feelings that you had, some of which were negative, about your own siblings growing up. So does your brother throw big fits in public? This is oftentimes coming from younger brothers and sisters. I think my microphone went out, so I'll have to use my big voice. All right. So, if anyone here, maybe if we could get the IT person not to see if we can get a new microphone. Is that possible? If not, I'll use my recorder voice.
Okay.
Throwing fits in public, so just one extra microphone or a battery for the microphone. Great. So it's really about saying embarrass them. Did they embarrass you because they just were your sibling, or did they embarrass you because they had Down syndrome, which were demonstrating one of those many characteristics that go along with Down syndrome, sometimes stubbornness? And what we know from brothers and sisters is rather than correcting the situation and saying, oh, just leave them alone, that's Down syndrome, or just love her because she has a sister with Down syndrome, all of a sudden that feeling of embarrassment will make you feel guilty for feeling that, right? So it's really saying, yeah, that was embarrassing yesterday when they threw that to the car. Yeah, it was. That's all you need to say to have validated it, because they've moved on, they've loved their brother or sister, but it's validating that negative emotion.
Yeah, and it helps if you share that you felt the same as well at different points in time. Why is my brother obsessed with TV movies? This comes up in just about every single workshop we give, where they talk about the movies that brother or sister watches over and over and over again. So they end up laughing about it. Brian has a great story about his sister and request for the birthday present.
All right. So my sister, my whole life is defined by the movies she's watched over and over and over again. And I love my parents, but I'm not afraid to fault them on certain things. So don't tell me right? So my sister, for one of her birthdays, so we had the Mary Poppins era, right? And then we had the Sound of Music era, where they told us we're always alive with the Sound of Music, right? And then we had the Grease era, over and over and over again. Okay, you get the thing. So now we're in the Grease era, which is the end of high school. It was Kristen's birthday. She opened up and said she got a DVD copy of Grease. Right? 2 gifts later, she opened up another DVD copy of Grease. Yes. By the 4th time she opened up a DVD copy of Grease, my mother said to her, why did you tell everyone you wanted the same gift? And for Kristen, it was obvious, and every single DVD place in our house, she had to have instant access. Which means that all of us needed to listen to Grease nonstop. There was no hiding. And my parents should have said, you can have this one place with the door closed to listen to Grease, but no. We were listening to that music, really driving my sister into my younger sister. Okay, that's not bad enough. How many of you have seen the touring Broadway cast of Grease? You? Great, I don't recommend it. Coming back with my mother, with parents or whatever, and over the radio, they said the touring Broadway cast of Grease is coming to Cleveland, Ohio. I turned to my mother, she goes, don't worry, we won't let your sister know we don't. 2 days later, Kristen opens up the Cleveland dealer, and there's the full page ad, Grease. What does my mother do? Gets ticket for all of us, because this is a family. We're going to do this as a family, and your sister wants this. Okay. So my mother's a school teacher, and so there's 2 rules in life, as you know, because you're a school teacher. Whenever possible, laminate it. Everything in my life. And the other thing was get there early. When I mean early, I mean like the show's going to start an hour from now, you better be in your seats, right? So we get there to the Cleveland Playhouse Theater, which is beautiful, and just to understand the way we're seated, we were kind of like way in the back, but we got those things, right? And so way in the back, the aisle was Kristen, then we go in, and it is myself, then we go Allison, then we go Mom, then we go Dad, all right? So we're all seated there, nothing's happening, more people moving in. And then at one point on the stage, the curtain parts. There's a man who's wearing jeans, and he has a white t-shirt, and he has a mop, and it looks like he's just a stagehand kind of getting the credit. So he's going through and he kind of taps the mic, goes testing, testing. I'm going to turn on some music. If anyone wants to come up here, you're welcome to come up here. He said, ooh, My mother took her hand over Alice, and she leans in as only a mother could do, and she says, "Go get." This is the last place I want to be. I don't want to really spend it with my family, and I don't like Greece, right? So there I am in the awkward stage of my life, and I don't know where Krista found it, but it's the first and only time in her life she was fast. She got down there, and I have never seen her before move. And so she gets down, by the time I get to the orchestra pit, she's already playing on the stage. I thought, she won't know any difference. I'm going to get on stage, walk to the other side, she'll get on stage, and she won't walk, right? Until I get on stage, and she gets in that lock. That stubborn lock, I'm not going anywhere.
Why are people with Down syndrome strong, right?
All of a sudden, there I was, there she was, I was going nowhere, and there was Cleveland staring at me. Okay, this is not what I want to do, but a lot of people are on stage doing their thing, right? This is before American Idol and all of this. And then this stage hand was actually learned an actor in the show, and this is part of the whole TV show. But when you realize it, he said, when I tap you on top of the head, go sit down, we're going to see who's the real man, right? Not going to be a problem there. We're down to the final 3 helps. Now, I have to tell you, you know that sweat that just kind of slowly gets down? It was like torrents coming down my neck. And I do not act, or should I, but in a theater, like I can see your faces now, the house lights are on, they turn the house lights off and it's all pitch black, which is terrifying when you're on stage, because is that person in the audience that I know who's staring at me? Oh my goodness, what is my mother saying? Like, it's just sheer and utter panic. This guy is on stage and then says, we're going to give each couple 30 seconds on their own to dance to a Grease song I'm going to play. And you, as Cleveland, get to vote for your favorite dance. I was angry. I had hate. I felt violent.
Don't forget embarrassed.
Right before they played that music, I took a millisecond look at Kristen's face, and all of a sudden, it all melted. She had that look of, I've been practicing all summer. Copies of Grease. I am in Grease. Throw any song at me. I am ready. And I said, oh, she's done it again. And how quickly our emotions change. We go from hate to utter love in a single moment. We did our little dance. Cleveland gave her a standing ovation. She won that dance competition, but she's proven it is a good thing. So Kristen, like so many people with Down syndrome, get out of their seats, go after their goals, and they don't wait for anyone to tell them, what have I been doing? I second guess myself. I say, I'm not ready. I'll wait for the next opportunity. I'm sitting back. I'm going to miss my time. And so Kristen, from a very early age, like she and so many teach their siblings with Down syndrome, get out of your seat, get on the stage.
That's really a microcosm of the whole experience, right? That in a nutshell could be our whole talk, right? I mean, that's the experience of a sibling, the positive, the negative, everything, right? All rolled into one. Just some more of the questions. I don't think we have to go through each one, maybe, Brian, but so how come he loves our new toys but not his? You know, there's always that he always gets the toy when we always have to give it up.
Testing.
Oh, good. You're working again. Good. Why don't you just put up all the questions in this category? Yeah. So I hate it when my sister copies me. What should I do? We always talk with siblings about imitation is the greatest form of flattery. How people with Down syndrome often learn from watching others. Why I think they like to watch Grease and all these other shows repeatedly, because they learn about interaction, social interaction, etc., and things kind of always work out in the end. So it's very kind of reinforcing. The question with the weird noises, we always just like to mention briefly, asking more about that. It might be noises that the child's making during the night. Maybe the child has sleep apnea. Maybe it's a sign of something else going on. So again, asking more to find out what is really underlying everything.
From our research, 61% of the younger siblings do worry about their sibling getting teased, and I think this is an unfortunate common phenomenon, but talking about it openly and honestly is the way that we're able to...
And it's the age where, you know, nobody
happens.
wants to be embarrassed, so they worry about it even more. 89% over age 12 think their friends are comfortable with their sibling, and as so many people have said, by the time you get to be an older teenager, you weed out the bad wood, so to speak, and you keep the people around you who are most reinforcing and supportive.
Only 7 and 5% feel that they're embarrassed and their social life is worse off. And I think if we were to survey neurotypically developing siblings, they would be at that percentage or greater. So there's a lot of honesty here.
Right.
But it's important to talk about as a family if they do feel things are unfair and why they're unfair. And if you say that your sons and daughters have a great relationship and then they enter their teenage years, you're like, why are they not getting along? That's okay. They can vacillate in and out. And sometimes we need to discover who we are and what we stand for. And it's hard enough to figure yourself out before you learn how to calibrate that again with your sibling who's growing up with Down syndrome. So sometimes we will enter and re-enter the relationships at different intensities.
Difficult moments question, why do people stare at my sister in public? This is often a conversation, again, in our sibling groups that we really talk about solutions and what to do in these situations. So it's a great conversation to have with your kids as well to help give them strategies and solutions to difficult moments.
How do I make my sister stop listening to baby music when she's 13, right? And so you as parents aren't cool. You don't know what cool music is. So this is an opportunity for you to empower your sons and daughters without Down syndrome and say, well, I don't know, teach them the cool music then, right? And if they learn, well, they keep on going back to Mary Poppins or Grease in this case. Maybe it's because repeating things over and over again are things that bring them comfort. Perhaps when they watch it for the next time, they learn more and more. I remember when Mamma Mia, the musical, came out with Meryl Streep in the movie theater, I said, this is a sure win for my sister. So I bought that $12 ticket. We went to the movie theater and she fell asleep halfway through. And I said, how could you do this? This has songs, this has colors, it's got Meryl Streep, like it's got everything. But when you think about it, it's a very complicated plot, right? So Kristen then got the DVD, she watched it over and over and over again, and each level she started to understand it more. And now she goes back to it as a favorite, she knows what's gonna happen at the end, she knows the song, she knows who all the characters are. So sometimes rehearsing is a way of better understanding.
Since I'm his little sister, he feels bad that I read much faster than him. What should I do? I think you alluded to that earlier. The other thing we sometimes see is a little bit of a role reversal that can happen, almost the opposite of that, where you have the younger sibling being a little bit angry and annoyed that the older sibling is not doing those chores, is not doing some of those activities. And sometimes there can be a little resistance. There's that point where the younger sibling begins to see themselves as the older sibling and know that they have a little bit more capability. And so that can be a tough time both for the person with Down syndrome and then the siblings without Down syndrome.
And then how do you deal with the R word, right? You handle that as parents, and I feel being open and honest when you discuss that word empowers them to do the same. We find that brothers and sisters, we try to encourage them to share how you feel, right? One approach is say, no, don't do just this word, this is intellectual, and you try to teach, and sometimes people don't want to be taught. But I have found in my own personal experiences, unless the person is really cruel, sharing how it feels makes a difference. When I was in medical school, one of my classmates who is brilliant and is now a radiation oncologist and still brilliant, used to use the word all the time. And how could you do this? Well, we got pictures up of people with Down syndrome. My sister has Down syndrome. Oh, I didn't mean it, I didn't mean it. And I said, this word makes me feel this way. It makes me feel that people are disparaging my sister, etc. And I kept on telling him how it made me feel. Eventually, he started to change, and the word wasn't used anymore. I remember 3 years later, he had a date over, and we were having family dinner around the table, and the date said, oh, I'm such a, use the R word. I kind of paused, and I'm not in a position to correct someone else's date. That's not my position. What was so nice is the next day, Will came up to me and said, Brian, I just want to let you know, I let her know how that word makes me feel, right? And I think it's being honest with people. What does that word feel like, and having the honesty to share that with people. But we also tell brothers and sisters, you don't need to be a champion 24/7. When your teacher uses the word, maybe that's in a position of power, you're not going to say something. When your boss uses the word, maybe you don't have to be courageous every time. Maybe that's not. When the good-looking cheerleader or the quarterback uses the word, maybe you fumble and you can't use it. Don't blame yourself. We can't constantly be advocates all the time, and we let brothers and sisters know they could choose their moments.
For sure, yeah. What should I do when my brother talks about things that I don't think are going to happen, like driving a car or becoming an actor? We have a lot of dreamers, and you don't ever want to dissuade those dreams because sometimes they can turn into a reality. But most of the time, what we suggest to brothers and sisters is that they take it step by step. And again, over time, sometimes that decision will be made for them, and to let them ease up and worry a little bit less about it, perhaps.
And sometimes they need to go through the process of experiencing it. So my sister wanted desperately to drive a car. And what I really respect from my parents, they said, okay, if you want to drive a car, you need to do what your brother and other sister did. You got to read and take a test. So they got the booklet, and God bless Kristen, she copied that driver's ed booklet word for word throughout the whole thing, just copied it. And then my mom and dad asked her questions, and it was clear that while she copied it, she didn't really understand the material. So she copied it again all over. And mom threw out saying, there's another way to get around. We have car services. This is the time they didn't have Uber, but now we have Uber and Lyft and lots of opportunities. And by the end, Kristen came to the conclusion, okay, I'll use a ride company. So what I respect my parents from, at the beginning, they didn't say, no, you can't do this. They allowed her to go through the process, and Kristen altered her goals, and they came in with the resources to support her when she made it.
I think sometimes we get into that feeling of protecting our child with Down syndrome and don't want them to experience that negativity and difficulty. But part of becoming who we are is we all have to deal with setbacks and disappointments, and people with Down syndrome are the same. So, letting them sort of go through that process, it's a growing experience and will help them learn a little bit more for the next time.
Absolutely. So we asked brothers and sisters to write a little essay about what have they learned from their sibling with Down syndrome, and Sue and I read every single word.
Yes, we did.
In your basement, reading through these. And these are the themes. Life is good and rewarding. I've learned many important perspectives. I understand differences better. And how awesome. Most adults, let's be honest, never even learned those life lessons. So as a sibling, to be able to get that, even at a very young age, puts you at a distinctive advantage, I think.
Certainly practice patience. That's something that anyone associated with Down syndrome needs to learn. How to love, and that really love conquers all in many respects. That everyone has talents. Those talents may be different from what we think of as typical talents, and that certainly people with Down syndrome are more alike than they are different. So again, not every sibling responded with the questionnaires, but those who did, those were some of the things that they came up with.
We asked brothers and sisters, what are the take-home messages you want us to give parents around the country? So this is straight from them, their lessons on how you could be a better parent. Be open and honest, explaining Down syndrome as early as possible. We talked about that, making sure that Down syndrome is not a bad word, but it's discussed, and it's an open opportunity to ask questions whenever possible.
Allow brothers and sisters to experience negative feelings. I think as a parent, when you see your other child expressing a negative emotion about the sibling, we immediately again want to jump in and protect and say, you shouldn't feel that way. This is your brother, this is your sister. But when we do that, what do? We create actually more guilt, because you may be saying you shouldn't feel that way, but the reality is you do feel that way in that moment. So again, understanding and giving kids time to process things, and sometimes responding if a child says, I hate him, I can't stand it when he always does X, Y, or Z, that maybe our answer should be, you are really angry right now, I hear that. It's frustrating when he continues to copy you, or he's always taking your whatever toy. So, kind of approaching it about it. Whoops, did I just go out?
You're going to, yeah.
Kind of to ease that as well.
And what we've really learned is what might seem like the biggest explosion really gets kind of balmed over. And years later, we know from brothers and sisters that those emotions of love and respect really do conquer all. And it's tough to kind of go back and unearth some of these. Sue and I were talking previously at a conference, what was my most negative feeling? Sue's always sick and tired of me talking about all the positive stuff. So I was
Gotta
like,
make
okay,
it real, right?
Yeah, let me think about this. And then I thought of one, and at the time, it was like awful when I was younger. And here, I had forgotten and needed to go back. And so my whole family loved to swim, and we'd oftentimes go to the pool when we were younger, and you could bring friends. I don't know, maybe 5th or 6th grade, and Kristen's 2 years younger. And Kristen at the time had bangs that she was growing out, and my mom would put her hair in a ponytail, and she would get in the water, and then her bangs would fall out of the ponytail, so she'd get out, she'd go to mom would fix her ponytail, but to get out of the water, it's cold to get back in. So pretty soon, she was turning to her brother, and she would say, do my hair, right? And I have all my friends with me in the pool, and so I'm like, do your hair, and then my mother from the side said, just do her hair, put her hair in a ponytail, right? So I put her hair in a ponytail, and it's odd looking back, but I just felt so embarrassed and awkward and all of that. So I did the only thing natural. I taught myself how to do the tightest French braids. So before we left, I got the hair nice and tight, so when she got to the pool, she would never embarrass me around my friends because that hair was in place. Now, I shouldn't have had to do that. My parents should have recognized that that was a negative, awkward moment, perhaps validated it, and we could have brainstormed some other solutions. But these little things, this was huge at the time, and years later, it's like funny to remember. So if you're having one of these huge blow-ups, just know that they're real, but they get kind of balmed over.
You know, just another little aside is I work in an agency with little ones with Down syndrome and other disabilities, and some of those kids are now in their 30s and 40s and still coming back. So I've kind of grown up with some of the families, and I've seen sort of the evolution of things. And you know, interestingly, I had a sibling panel, and there was one girl who went through a really, really tough time when she was 11, 12, 13, and there was just a lot of embarrassment and difficulty. So I brought it up in a workshop, and she had no memory of it. She did not remember the tough time. So where this experience was so tough for the mom to watch, it wasn't even something that was remembered in the future. So I think it's kind of nice to know that sometimes those difficult moments, you know, like you say, they do kind of have a life of their own, but then they dissipate, and things get sunny again, right?
So again, recognizing we do have difficult moments. You had difficult moments, that's normal, and just kind of appreciating those.
Right, appreciate and maybe do things a little bit differently. Maybe, no, your sister doesn't have to come to every single one of your baseball games if you want to have one baseball game without your sister yelling constantly from the stands. So, you know, even kind of just directing or changing things up a little bit to appreciate their needs, their emotional needs. Limit caregiving responsibilities. We've had siblings tell us they don't mind babysitting, they don't mind helping out, but they would like to not just have you assume that they're going to do that. Maybe to be asked, would it be okay if you watched her after school tomorrow? Not, I'm not going to be home, so you need to be there for your sister. So again, even if you don't have an alternative, it just might be nice to ask. There's something kind of nice about doing that and being respected.
It could go the other way, is we could fall into the trap of assuming the role of a third parent rather than a sibling. And this is my greatest fault nowadays, right? So I still need to be Kristen's brother, but at the same time, I might go to my mother and father and say, well, why don't you do this and this and this? And I need to be reminded, thanks for the information, but we're still the parents and your role is to be a sibling, right? Because Kristen needs me as a brother and she doesn't need me as another parent telling her what to do.
Recognize the individuality and uniqueness of each child in the family. I think most of you are probably doing that. You're here and you're here in this workshop because of the other siblings, and just really acknowledging everyone's strengths, not measuring one up against the other.
Be fair. And sometimes it's not always obvious that you're being fair, but explaining and being open and explaining that if this
remember
is your
the girl
choice,
with the peas, you know? Just remember how, just kind of looking at the big picture, right?
Absolutely.
Take advantage of supports for siblings. So again, having the opportunity to be part of sibling workshops if they're around for you. And if not, we always feel like our book is almost like a sibling group in a book, so that has a lot of those same questions and discussion points that your other children might experience were you to be in a situation where you had a sibling group available to you. So just letting kids know, I think just like there are Facebook groups and support groups for you guys, it really does help brothers and sisters to know there are other people out there experiencing the same thing that they are experiencing. And if you've enrolled them in the groups here, it's just a wonderful experience for the kids.
Happy parents make a happy home. So brothers and sisters, recognize that you have a hard job. It's okay for you to take a break. It's okay for you to take a chill session. They recognize that and they want you to know that.
Right, and being here provides you with support and energy to go on further in life, right?
The questions we talked about are just a small number of the questions that we put into our book, and as Sue mentioned, it's our whole workshop in a book. And right after we're done, again, we're going to be heading to booth 239. Be happy to answer more of your questions there. Be happy to sign a copy of the book if you would like that for your sons and daughters. We find it's a book that they could start around third grade and really grow up with. It has questions anywhere from characteristics of Down syndrome to how do you become the caregiver for your brother or sister with Down syndrome when your parents might pass away. So it has all those questions in a book.
We have to update that. I think we need to do some new workshops or new little things there. But you can find us on YouTube answering some of these questions for brothers and sisters.
So for those that love to watch as much as they love to read,
And a lot of
we've
kids
taken
do
lots
like
of our
that.
questions
Yeah.
and we put them up there, and the questions are really timeless.
I pulled this up at one of my sibling groups, and one of the kids said, "You've only had," I don't know what the number of what people who've watched this. He was like, it was like such a small number, and he was like, "You got to be kidding me!"
We have not gone viral.
No, we really haven't. We have to do something about that, Brian.
So many people we want to thank, of course, all the Down syndrome organizations and the people who helped us with our research to make it happen, and all the people who gave us the grant funding to do the work that we love to do with you. And of course, Sue and I want to stay in touch. Here's our contact information, and I want to particularly thank my two sisters who have taught me so much, Kristen and Allison. So thank you on behalf of both of us for inviting us here again, talking about siblings issues, and I hope we stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.